In this video, what we're going to do is take a look at some nodes that I feel don't get used enough in Redshift. And these nodes, one of which is actually new, or at least in Redshift it's new. I think it's been around in Cinema 4D, but these nodes can save us a bunch of time. They have a lot of different ways we can work with them, and that's what we're going to take a look at today. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so the first node we're going to be taking a look at is the Tri-Planar node. We'll then take a look at the new tiles node, and that I feel like was actually in Cinema 4D's standard materials. We'll take a look at the ramp a couple of different ways, and then we will also talk about round corners. Might have already said that actually, but those are the nodes we're going to be covering in this video. So let's go ahead and get started. Just to show us what we're talking about here when it comes to the triplanar, it is very useful where you have very apparent seams on your object, or one where a projection changes and you see one texture stopping and another starting. And so you can see it on our cube here with the different colors. You can see it with a texture here on this sphere where I actually did change the projection to cubic to better illustrate this. And this can happen if you download a model and the UVs or UVWs aren't very good. And we can see that actually a little bit here as well, where the seam is changing from one projection to the next because it's currently set to cubic. And so rather than have to unwrap this or do a lot of work with the UVs, we can use the triplanar node to help fix this, especially when the texture is tileable like this fabric texture is. So let's turn off the spheres. I have my material selected down here, and the node we're going to create is called a triplanar. Now, what you can do is rather than just double click or drag this in here, if you actually drag it in on the connection between our texture and it going into the base color, then it will automatically go in there for us. So we have that connected just like this. It plugs it into the image X, which by default in the triplanar, it's using the same image on each axis. If you want to put a different image in an axis or on these different axes, you absolutely can undo that, uncheck that, and make sure to plug those in where you want them. What I'm actually going to do though is unhook this texture because I want us to be able to see the individual colors to better understand what the triplanar is doing. So very much like how we just had different colors on the sphere, we are now seeing those colors on our cube. And really what the triplanar is doing is blending or blurring between those different colors or wherever we have those transitions. Now, in some places, the blur is a little bit more prevalent than others. You can kind of see we get all sorts of craziness going on down here. And honestly, that's why, unwrapping objects or creating UVs is so important so that you get very consistent UV islands and your textures don't have any problems. But that can take a lot of time, and the triplanar is a great way to really try and avoid that whole process. And the big thing we would want to work with here is the blend amount. The blend curve can work a little bit as well, but as you increase the blend amount, we're going to see some softening where those colors meet, and not just here where the seams are perhaps a little bit larger, but also down there where they're smaller. Now, unfortunately, because the textures are a little bit larger here, the seams are larger, it's going to be blurred more here than it is down there. But I think once we pipe in or connect back in the fabric texture, that it won't be as noticeable. Blend curve can also help as well. Like I said, one of the things I've noticed is this doesn't update maybe quite as fast or often as it could. So you may see me refreshing this. So that actually, by turning up the blend curve, got rid of some of that blur. So let's go the other direction there. And we should see the opposite where we get, yep, absolutely more blur. But the default value, if I just right click on one of those arrows of 2, seems to be working pretty well. And then I'll just leave it up to the blend amount to control how much of that we're doing. And really with this, you do want to have your texture connected. So I will put it back into image X. I will go turn on same image on each axis to do that. And it actually looks pretty good here, but the scale is a bit too large. So I'm going to type in 0.05 for all of these. I don't know why they just don't kind of keep the scale the same. Even that looks a little bit large. So I'll do 0.03 to get this a size that I like. I mean, honestly, I want to be able to see those seams, so a little bit larger isn't the end of the world. And that's looking pretty good. I could maybe go up just a bit more, maybe to something like 0.5, and that's looking pretty good. I wouldn't mind zooming in here to see if we see any of those issues as well. It really doesn't look like we do. Another thing that's really nice about this is that we can rotate these textures on a different axis. So for instance, if I would want the fabric pattern here to be going vertically instead of horizontally, I can rotate it. And I think it's the Z here, but let me just double check. Yep. So now it's going vertically. So this can also be very useful for trying to get, say, a brushed metal texture to, follow the direction you would like it to. So that looks pretty good. Still maybe seeing a little bit of that. And once again, it may not get rid of it completely, but we can always just increase the blend amount and do a quick refresh and see if that doesn't help. And overall, I think that looks quite a bit better than what we had previously. And just to kind of show that, what I'll do is save it. So there is our good version. There is our bad version. Size is a bit different, so it's not quite an apples to apples comparison, but I can save that. And now we can see just how much softer it is and that we have our pattern going a different direction. That also is very useful. So that is a look at our Triplanar node. Let's talk about the new to Redshift tiles shader. So what I'm going to do is create a material, apply it to our cube here. Okay, and like I said, I swear this was in our standard materials that we would use previously with the physical renderer or the standard renderer. But if you search tiles, this is what you will get. So I'll double click on it and I can then connect that to whatever property I want. And in this case, it will be the base color. So let me refresh my render and get rid of those other images. And so this is what we have. And at first you may look at this and go, I really don't see how useful, or how this could be useful, I should say. But we do have several patterns built in. And if this looks familiar, like I said, it's probably because it is. But it's nice that we have this available to us in Redshift. So we have a few different brick options available. We've probably come back to this and make carbon fiber out of this. You name it, okay? Random. You want to do some stained glass type stuff, but I could definitely envision this being useful if you did go with, say, one of the brick patterns. And I'm going to just eyedrop our second tile color and change the grout color to be something perhaps a little bit more realistic. Okay, something like that. And from there, we can start to introduce some more realistic detail to this, because that's really where this kind of falls short, is the amount of detail you can get. Now, I see we do have some noise options, but it doesn't look like we can really use it with this particular mode. So I guess I guess it's more for randomizing the color, which could be helpful if I chose a slightly darker red here. Okay, so maybe a little bit darker than that. And that way I could get just a little bit of variation in the color. What I would do then is actually take a noise, max on noise, because why not? And I'll multiply this against the tiles. So I'm going to get a multiply node as well and plug both of these in here. And so that way I'll just be taking the darker values from my max on noise, adding it on top of our tiles. And you can see it's a bit too much. So we can work with this in a few different ways. Gonna make the scale smaller. I think that worked. But really, I want to see more of that red coming through. Okay, and if my multiply isn't working, it's strange that it isn't. Maybe let's switch the order here, although I don't see why that should matter. Really, we lost all the color from that. Then I would use a mix instead. So color mix. Right, and put that to our base color, increase our mix amount, and we can start to see some of that noise coming through, especially if I just use darker values and bring some of those back. Okay, so that's starting to actually get somewhere. I think the pattern now at this point is probably a bit too small. Maybe I'll do like a 0.25. Change the actual type of noise being used. So, okay, that's starting to look good. And from there, use this in the bump. Okay. Now, there's still a lot more work I would actually do with this. I may want to use a different um, noise just in my grout. Okay. So with that, I could use this tiles is a mask where I set the tiles color to black, the grout color to white, and use that to kind of mix and add different noises in just certain areas, because this still has a long way to go. But hopefully, especially because the roughness and amount of reflectivity is way too high, but hopefully you can start to see how we can use this to create procedural textures here. Another interesting mode I mentioned for this was the weave for carbon fiber, which is something I do quite often. Probably should have kept my bump map node. Okay, let's refresh this because I don't know why I'm seeing the bump. There we go. So for the pattern here, we could use something like weave. And I don't think this is intended to be carbon fiber, or else why wouldn't they just call it carbon fiber? But I do think it can work pretty well. So make one of these. Actually, let's see. I think maybe this. Let's see. I'm not sure what the default colors are supposed to be. I don't want randomized color turned on. Let's just create a new tiles. That way I can start with the same colors that, or at least the default colors there. All right, so weave, I want to make, say, the red black. And if I wanted to, actually, maybe not quite that, dark, lose all the detail there. Perfect. We could adjust those other colors as well. I would definitely want this smaller, so adjust the scale here in this one, global scale. So that's looking a little bit better, maybe a little bit more like carbon fiber. Actually, still want to go quite a bit smaller for something like that. Maybe something there. And I would then plug this into a bump map as well to give me a little bit more detail in this. Now here I would actually want my reflectivity. Okay. And now we have something that is starting to look like carbon fiber, especially kind of on the top there as it's angled. So that may be something we would want to adjust on some of these other sides. So tiles, very useful for creating some different patterns. It does take a little bit of work though to make them realistic, which there's nothing wrong with that, but still something to keep in mind. Now, another node I wanted to talk about, and I'll just talk about it right here, is round corners. So if you just come into your nodes, start typing in round corners, you will see this. And this allows us to round out edges on geometry that, for whatever reason, we don't want to bevel, we can't bevel. Now, technically, this is a cube. It's not an editable polygon object, so I could always just turn on fillet. But if I hadn't done this, and this was just, say, an object that I had booled or inset or extruded or whatever other reasons there might be for me to have some issues beveling this, round corners can absolutely help. Let me switch the projection on this texture though to cubic so that we get some better looking textures on these newly created geometry. And we'll lower the size, although we could also just do it in the coordinates tab here as well. So I'll set that to, say, 30 centimeters for each one of these. And that will hopefully make it smaller. Yeah, that's kind of about what we had before. All right, I do wish this was rotated. So I don't want to spend too much time doing this, but maybe we can get something. I don't think I need that one at 45. So that, yeah, like that a little bit better. And now we can take our round corners. And what's interesting about round corners is you don't actually need to plug it into the bump map node. So if you're not using anything else in the bump map node, all you have to do is connect it directly to your bump map property. And what you'll see is that rounded edge. And really quick, I'm going to disconnect it. refresh because I will save this so we can compare it. So that looks good enough for me. Get rid of these other two, connect my round corners back up. Okay, refresh. And that's really kind of what we're seeing there, right? You can see it in on those edges there. You can increase the radius as well. So if you want more roundness, we can do that. Now keep in mind, this is a shading effect. So, a bump map is a fake way of giving us kind of extra detail on a material. This rounded corners is even more of a fake, okay, or a trick, you could say. So it is going to break down at some point with the size. And so a value of 2 here looks like it might be too large. Perhaps a value of 1 is still going to hold up pretty well. What I find interesting is I really don't think I'm seeing it a whole lot on the top here. It's really more on these sides, as well as kind of that type of intersection or part of my geometry. And once again, depending on how close we're getting to something, it may look a little bit better. And that's really the idea of this rounded corners, is that if you have an object or a piece of geometry that you're not going to get very close up to, but you want to add perhaps just a little bit more detail in bevel and get the result of a bevel without actually having to add that geometry, then round corners is the way to do that. And what you can do if you want to combine that with a normal bump map here is use a bump map blender. So I'm not going to get into this node today, but this does allow you to combine multiple bump maps. So that could be round quarters, it could be our tiles, and we can get them all working together here. So that's a look at our round corners node. I might have shown that before. Okay, I think I've shown this next one as well, but I wanted to make a video where I put all of these in one place and show you some different uses for them. Now I know I've talked about this next one, our random kind of approach to using the ramp here. So I'm going to create a material, apply it to my cloner. Okay, and you'll see my colors disappear. And I am just using a random effector where I switch the color mode to effector color here, but I'm not using position, rotation, or scale. I'm just having it generate the random colors. Now, when you apply a material, that random color goes away. If you wanted to get that color back, you need to use a color data node. And while I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time talking about this, I'm going to connect this to my base color. And then I need to decide what attribute I want to use for our color here. And I know this is a bit off screen, but I'm going with MoGraph and then color. Okay. And when I do that, you will then see my colors come back. All right. So you can see it's Redshift, MoGraph, color. Okay. Is the name of that attribute, but it's in the presets here under MoGraph. It's the first one, color, which, like I said, I know is off screen. From here, though, it can be hard to work with these random colors in a way that you like. So, these colors are random. I don't particularly like them. And what we'll see is we have different ways of working with these colors, changing them to something we like more, something that's more manageable, that we can adjust using a ramp. Okay. So that's what we're doing here. I want to point out that in the effector tab, though, if nothing else, you can just change the seed if you want to change the colors. But, even with that, it's not a lot of control. We probably won't end up with, something we absolutely love. And even then, if we wanted to change just one particular color, we don't have the ability to do that. So what we want to do is create a ramp. Right, and we're going to plug this ramp in between our color user data and our base color. So just like I did previously, I will drag and drop it onto our connection there. And what we're doing now is taking those colors and we are mapping them to our ramp here. And so it's converting those values to black and white. And since a lot of those colors were darker, we are ending up with more darker cubes now. So if nothing else, I may just start to bring this in to help get a little bit more even distribution here. I do find it interesting. I'm seeing something different in my perspective view, but I'll have to chalk that up to just a Redshift thing. But really, what I want to show you is if you load in a different ramp or make your own. So for instance, maybe I'll just do like a rainbow, since that would be pretty representative. You can see the colors it's using. So we're seeing a lot of the purple, a little bit of the blue, just a touch of the green. So really these first 4 colors. So what I'm going to do, I think I can select multiple knots here. Yeah, just by holding shift, is take these and just slide them all closer together here in that range. And so by using that smaller area, okay, we should see more of those colors. Now, still way more purple than anything else. So I can keep going in. And interestingly, now we have the opposite problem where we are getting a lot of red. So you can play with the positions here, but now, if nothing else, you have control over what colors are being used. And oops, you can come in here, and rather than do this knot by knot, or I'm sorry, all knots at once, you may want to just move them individually. So move one to the left and say, all right, I'm pretty happy with the amount of blues, or I'm getting there. Okay, then take the next one and say that can be over here. Take some of the greens, pull those in, say, all right, I'm seeing some yellows. Okay, so I can pull that in a bit more. Starting to get some, some orange in there, red. But it's all based on the colors in our ramp here. And this is where I think that seed value comes in a bit more handy, because we can see if we get something that looks a little bit better. And though really I would reset that gradient in the knot position there if I was going to mess with the seed value, just because if I've done too much to it, we may not see everything as much as we could. You could also experiment with the different modes here. Those don't always work, but at least sorted I wouldn't really use for that purpose. But you have some different options there. And like I said, it really comes down to this ramp and adjusting these knots. And you may have to spend a bunch of time in order to get the values you want. It really is a shame, because my perspective view here is doing a much better job in kind of showing what I was hoping to get rather than what I am getting in Redshift. But playing with the knots here, their position, you can always flip-flop as well if you want, say more blue than purple. Maybe purple goes on this side. So that way you can get some more variety, because if you just do straight, green, blue to light blue, then that's all you're going to get there. Whereas here, if you kind of alternate, you can get a little bit more variety in those colors since they are alternating. But that is one use of our ramp. Okay. Another use of the ramp is something like this material, this scratches texture that I've already connected. Now, this texture I did just grab from the asset browser. Okay, so I don't think I have it pulled up anymore, but it was one of kind of these lighter scratches, something like this. Okay, and actually I think I searched for imperfections really, but same difference. I think it was one of these. You'll notice here in these imperfections map, some are very bright, some are very dark, which means we're going to get very different results with them in a material. And what that means is we may not get the results we want in that texture, from that texture in whatever property we've connected it to. And this is especially true if you've downloaded, say, textures off the internet, where, who knows what renderer they were made for, what values map to roughness. Is black 0, is white 1. Sometimes it can be the opposite depending what renderer you're using. Or if you just want to make something lighter or darker, this is a very nice procedural way of doing this. And that's the idea with a lot of these nodes, is that it's saving us from going into Photoshop and making changes to our nodes themselves. So I'm going to hit the plus sign here, create a ramp, and I'm just going to drop this once again on the connection between that texture and our where it's going. In this case, reflection roughness. Now we're going to treat more like a levels than we are anything else. It's still remapping the colors, okay? But it's doing it, we're just going to keep the values as black and white here because we are working with the roughness property. I can also solo this ramp just so I can get a better idea of what it's looking like on my geometry. And so what I can do is start to bring in my black knot here. Notice how I'm darkening up those values, getting rid of the gray, but we still have a few of our brighter areas left, which is great. I can then take in the whiter knot here, the white knot, to start to clamp those values. So, this is almost like a brightness contrast, levels, whatever you want to call it. But now I have pushed those values a lot further, which means our scratches are going to be a lot more prevalent. So it's essentially an all or nothing thing with the scratches. Whereas before, when it was gray, we were having some in-between values with our roughness, because at least in Redshift materials, black means 0 roughness, white means 100% roughness. So gray is in between there. And once again, let's do a comparison just so we can see. So here's the one I adjusted. I'm going to go ahead and, did I lose that? Yeah, I did. Save that. I'll connect our original image up and save that. Okay, and you can see the difference here, right? The original image overall is a lot rougher because we have those gray values, which are somewhere in between. Whereas after the ramp, we clamped those values and made them darker, so we're getting less roughness in those areas. Now, I'm not saying one is better than the other. All I'm saying is we are getting two different results. And so if the texture you originally plug in doesn't give you what you want, especially if it's a black and white image, something going into roughness or butt map, maybe opacity, most properties other than color are black and white, aside from like reflection color and transmission color. But you can really control how much roughness, how little roughness you're getting with an image by using a ramp like this, as opposed to bringing it into after Photoshop and kind of doing it manually, because there you're just having to guess. Whereas here we can see it, update it in real time. We could also do this with the color correct node, and that has some additional properties as well, especially if you wanted to change the color, but that is meaningless here. But the ramp is a little bit lighter weight, a little bit more streamlined. And honestly, I think this kind of phased approach with the black and white point essentially works a lot better than the color correct node, where you essentially have like a contrast and a brightness. And they work kind of differently and independently of each other. That will do it for this video. Hopefully you saw some new nodes, maybe some nodes you haven't used in the way I showed them to you. I'd appreciate it if you could like the video, comment if there's anything else you would like to see, and subscribe. So until next time, take care.